Monday, May 4th, 2026. Volodymyr Zelensky stands before the cameras and makes an announcement that surprises the entire world. Ukraine, the country being bombed every single night, is declaring a ceasefire. Not waiting for Russia. Not demanding conditions first. Not sending a diplomatic note through back channels. Ukraine is going first. Starting midnight, Tuesday into Wednesday, May 6th, Ukraine will go silent. No strikes, no attacks, no retaliation. A unilateral ceasefire offered openly, publicly to the entire world. Human life, Zelensky said, is far more valuable than any anniversary celebration. The world listened. Diplomats nodded. Hope, cautious, fragile hope, flickered. And then Russia responded. Not with a diplomatic statement, not with a phone call to Washington, not with any gesture of reciprocity. Russia launched 11 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 164 strike drones at Ukraine. Hours before the ceasefire was supposed to begin, 5 people were killed, 39 were wounded. Russia struck Ukraine's power grid, in the dead of night, in the cold, killing civilians who had no idea a ceasefire had even been proposed, who were simply trying to sleep through another night of war. And then, with the bodies still being counted, Russia's defense ministry announced its own ceasefire. For May 9th, for the parade. This is the story of the most cynical 48 hours in the history of this war, and it tells you everything you need to know about whether Russia actually wants peace. Welcome back. Let's get into it. To understand just how extraordinary Ukraine's ceasefire declaration was, you need to understand the position Ukraine was in when Zelensky made it. It was May 4th, 2026. Ukraine had just endured one of the most brutal weeks of the entire war. Russian forces had launched 9,870 kamikaze drones in a single day, the largest drone assault in the history of the conflict. Russian missiles had killed a student in a university dormitory in Dnipro. Russian drones had blown up a civilian bus in Kherson, killing 2 people. Russian artillery had fired over 3,200 attacks in a single 24-hour period. Ukraine was bleeding. Its power grid, attacked systematically and deliberately by Russia for years, was under fresh assault. Its cities were exhausted. Its people were exhausted. And yet, Zelensky stood up and said, "We will stop first. We believe that human life is far more valuable than any anniversary celebration," he said, a direct and pointed reference to Russia's stated reason for its own proposed ceasefire, Putin's May 9th Victory Day parade. Ukraine's ceasefire would begin at midnight on the night of May 5th into May 6th. It would cover all fronts. It would be unilateral, meaning Ukraine wasn't waiting for Russia to agree, wasn't setting preconditions, wasn't demanding anything in exchange. Ukraine was simply stopping and inviting Russia to do the same. This was a move of genuine diplomatic sophistication, because Zelensky understood exactly what the moment required. After weeks of being portrayed, by Russian propaganda, by some Western commentators, by the general exhaustion of global public opinion, as an obstacle to peace, Ukraine was seizing the initiative. Ukraine was saying clearly and publicly to Donald Trump, to European leaders, to the whole watching world, we want peace. Watch what Russia does next. Life over parades, Kiev's official communications put it. 3 words. Devastating in their simplicity. The ceasefire announcement was made after Zelensky met with leaders of the European political community in Yerevan, Armenia, a gathering of leaders from across the continent. He told them something that cut through the diplomatic fog of the entire war. This summer will be a moment when Putin decides what to do next, expand the war or move to diplomacy, and we must push him toward diplomacy. He had already been pushing. For months, Ukraine had proposed a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. For months, Russia had either rejected it outright or agreed to partial truces it immediately violated. The Easter ceasefire of April 2026 saw nearly 3,000 Russian violations in 48 hours. The energy infrastructure ceasefire of March 2025 was violated almost every single night. Ukraine knew what Russia's answer would probably be. But it offered the ceasefire anyway, because the world needed to see the answer for itself. Here is what happened next. Less than 24 hours after Ukraine announced its ceasefire, on the night of Monday into Tuesday, May 5th, Russian forces launched a massive overnight attack on Ukraine. 11 Iskander-M ballistic missiles, 164 strike drones, including a jet-powered Shahed drone variant, one of the most dangerous models in Russia's arsenal. The targets? Ukraine's power grid. Let me be precise about what attacking a power grid means in practice. It means hitting the electrical substations, the transformer stations, the transmission lines that carry electricity to hospitals, to maternity wards, to apartment buildings where children are sleeping, to the heating systems that keep people alive in winter, to the water pumping stations that provide clean drinking water to millions of people. Russia has been attacking Ukraine's power grid systematically for years, not because it serves a military purpose, but because making civilians cold, dark, and desperate is a deliberate strategy to break morale. 5 people were killed in that overnight attack, 39 were wounded. In the Kyiv region alone, the casualty toll from a drone attack rose to 3. Across Ukraine, emergency services raced to fires sparked by debris. Hospitals switched to backup generators. Families huddled together in darkness. And while all of this was happening, while Ukrainian emergency responders were pulling bodies from the rubble, while doctors were treating the wounded in hospital corridors lit by generator power, Russia's defense ministry released a statement. They were announcing a ceasefire for May 9th. Zelensky's response was immediate, public, and precise. One word captured the moral reality of what Russia had done. Cynicism, he said. Utter cynicism. He went further. Russia's ceasefire proposals remain only statements. While proposing a ceasefire, Russia kills. This is Russia's real face. Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko echoed him. Russia's ceasefire proposals remain only statements. Now let's be absolutely clear about the timeline, because the timeline is everything. Russia proposed its May 9th ceasefire. Ukraine responded by proposing its own ceasefire, starting sooner on May 6th, with no strings attached. And then, while its own ceasefire proposal was still on the table, while the world was still processing Ukraine's gesture, Russia launched 175 missiles and drones at Ukrainian civilians. Russia proposed peace. Ukraine matched it and went first. Russia then bombed 5 people to death. That is not a ceasefire negotiation. That is contempt. Now let's zoom in on something that Zelensky said at the European Political Community meeting in Yerevan, something that didn't get nearly enough attention in Western coverage, but that tells you something profound about where this war actually stands right now. Russia has announced a May 9th parade in Moscow without military equipment, Zelensky said. If that happens, it will be the first time in many, many years. They cannot afford military equipment, and they fear drones may buzz over Red Square. This is telling. It shows they are not strong now. Read that again. Russia, the country that has spent decades building its international image on the spectacle of military power, whose Victory Day parade is the single most important annual demonstration of Russian strength, has announced that this year, for the first time in memory, there will be no tanks, no armored vehicles, no missile systems rolling across Red Square. Why? 2 reasons, and Zelensky named both of them. First, the hardware is gone. Russia's military has suffered catastrophic equipment losses in Ukraine. Western analysts and Ukrainian military intelligence both estimate that Russia has lost thousands of tanks, armored fighting vehicles, artillery systems, and other heavy equipment since the full-scale invasion began in February 2022. The vehicles that would normally roll across Red Square on May 9th are burning in Ukrainian fields. Ukraine's Defense Minister Mikhailo Fedorov reported that in April 2026 alone, Ukraine inflicted 35,203 Russian casualties, killed or seriously wounded. In a single month, Russia has been unable to compensate for its personnel losses through mobilization for 5 consecutive months. The math is catching up with the Kremlin. Second, the drones. Ukraine has demonstrated repeatedly and convincingly that it can reach targets deep inside Russia. In the same overnight attack where Ukraine launched its Flamingo cruise missiles at a military plant in Cheboksary, 1,500 kilometers from the front line, Ukrainian drones also reached the Kurishi oil refinery near St. Petersburg, in Russia's Leningrad region. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin announced that Russian air defenses downed a number of drones near the Russian capital itself, near Moscow. The idea that a Ukrainian drone could appear over Red Square during the Victory Day parade, broadcast live on Russian television, witnessed by generals and foreign dignitaries and Putin himself, is not a fantasy. It is a real possibility that Russia's security services are taking extremely seriously. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed that its forces are taking all necessary measures to ensure the safety of the parade. All necessary measures for a parade. Because the alternative, a Ukrainian drone over Red Square on May 9th, would be the single most devastating blow to Putin's domestic narrative in the entire history of this war. The great Russian military, unable to protect its own capital on its most sacred holiday. So the tanks stay home, the missiles stay home, and Putin stands on a reviewing platform watching soldiers march, without the hardware that is supposed to symbolize Russian power, because that hardware is in pieces in Ukrainian fields, and what's left might get hit by a drone if it drives through Moscow. Zelensky called it evidence that Russia is not strong now. He's right. And the parade without tanks is the most honest public admission of that weakness Russia has made since the war began. Russia's behavior in the 48 hours before Ukraine's ceasefire was not an anomaly. It was a pattern. And documenting that pattern is essential, because every time Russia proposes a ceasefire, there are voices in Western media and Western politics who take it at face value, who say, maybe this time is different. Maybe Russia genuinely wants peace. Let's look at the record. March 18, 2025. Energy infrastructure ceasefire. Russia agrees to stop attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure for 1 month, following American diplomatic pressure. What happened? Ukraine documented 8 separate strikes on energy infrastructure in the weeks that followed. The ceasefire was violated almost nightly. April 19 through 21st, 2026. Easter ceasefire. Russia declares a ceasefire for the Orthodox Easter holiday. Ukraine's monitoring counted close to 3,000 Russian ceasefire violations in 48 hours. 3,000. That's more than 1 violation per minute, continuously, for 2 full days. May 5, 2026, the night before Ukraine's ceasefire. Russia launches 175 missiles and drones at Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. 5 people killed. 39 wounded. Hours before a ceasefire, Ukraine had already declared. The Washington Times analysis captured the pattern precisely. The truce proposal follows a familiar pattern of Russia declaring short, unilateral ceasefires during the war, timed to various holidays that don't produce any tangible results, amid deep mistrust between Moscow and Kiev. Deep mistrust. That phrase does a lot of diplomatic work. Let's be more direct. There is no mistrust here. There is documented, verified, time-stamped evidence that Russia announces ceasefires and then keeps attacking. This is not mistrust. This is a documented behavioral pattern that has been observed across multiple ceasefires, over multiple years, corroborated by Ukrainian officials, Western intelligence agencies, and independent monitoring organizations. Russia's military doctrine, as described by Russia's own officials, is explicit. Any ceasefire is conditional on Ukrainian compliance with Russian terms, and Russia reserves the right to respond militarily to any perceived Ukrainian provocation, even during a declared ceasefire. That is not a ceasefire. That is a conditional pause in which Russia maintains the right to resume attacking at any moment it chooses, while using the ceasefire label to generate diplomatic cover and domestic propaganda. And here is the cruelest irony of all. While Russian missiles were killing 5 Ukrainian civilians on the night of May 5th, Russia's defense ministry was simultaneously announcing that its forces would take all necessary measures to ensure the safety of the Victory Day parade. The safety of a parade. 5 civilians dead, 39 wounded. And Russia's concern is the safety of a parade. Now here's the part of the story that the simplistic both sides framing misses entirely. Ukraine, in the hours before its own ceasefire began, launched a series of precision strikes against Russian military-industrial targets. Not civilian targets, not cities. Military production facilities that manufacture the weapons Russia uses to kill Ukrainian civilians. The crown jewel of these strikes was the attack on the Vnir Progress plant in Cheboksary, the capital of Russia's Chuvash Republic, located over 1,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian front line. Zelensky confirmed it himself, publishing video footage of the launches. The weapons used were Ukraine's domestically produced F-5 Flamingo cruise missiles, a new long-range strike system that Ukraine has been deploying with increasing frequency and effectiveness. What does Vnir Progress make? According to Ukraine's general staff, the facility produces GNSS receivers and antennas for GLONASS, GPS, and Galileo satellite navigation systems. These components are installed in Shahid kamikaze drones, the same drones that attacked Ukrainian civilians that same night. They're used in Iskander-M ballistic missiles, in Caliber cruise missiles, in the UMPK modules that turn ordinary aerial bombs into precision-guided weapons. In short, Vnir Progress makes the brains of Russia's weapons, the navigation systems that allow Russian missiles to find Ukrainian hospitals, schools, and apartment buildings with precision. Ukraine just burned those brains. A large fire was visible from across Cheboksary. Videos posted by local residents showed smoke rising from the facility. The Russian Defense Ministry confirmed it had shot down 6 Ukrainian Flamingo missiles, but acknowledged the strike had occurred, and local reports confirmed the fire at the plant. On the same night, Ukrainian drones attacked the Kirishi oil refinery in the Leningrad region, near St. Petersburg. A fire broke out in the industrial zone. Russia's governor reported 29 Ukrainian drones were shot down, but the refinery was hit. Multiple airports across Russia were temporarily shut down overnight due to drone threats. Moscow Mayor Sergei Sobyanin confirmed drones had been intercepted near the Russian capital. This is Ukraine's strategy laid out in plain sight. While Russia bombs Ukrainian cities to terrorize the population, Ukraine strikes Russian military production, systematically, methodically, precisely, to degrade Russia's ability to manufacture the weapons it uses to kill civilians. And then Ukraine stops, declares its ceasefire, goes silent. Russia must end its war and move to real diplomacy, Zelensky wrote. We have made our proposal. The contrast could not be more stark. Russia bombs civilians hours before a ceasefire. Ukraine strikes weapons factories hours before a ceasefire. And then Ukraine goes quiet. Russia kept shooting. So where does this leave the diplomatic picture as of May 6, 2026? Let's start with Donald Trump, because Trump is the variable that matters most right now. Trump has grown increasingly frustrated with the lack of progress on ending the war. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said publicly that Trump has grown weary and frustrated with both sides. Vice President J.D. Vance warned that America might walk away if progress isn't made. But here's what changed in the 48 hours of May 5th and 6th. Ukraine offered a ceasefire. Russia bombed 5 people dead before it started. Ukraine struck weapons factories. Russia kept shooting during what it claimed was its own ceasefire proposal period. Trump called Zelensky a tricky guy, but said he likes him, which is not exactly a ringing endorsement of the ceasefire process, but it's also not abandonment. The deeper question is whether the events of May 5th shifted Trump's calculation, whether watching Russia kill 5 Ukrainian civilians hours before a Ukrainian ceasefire, while simultaneously proposing its own ceasefire, made it clearer to Washington which side is playing games. From Kiev's perspective, that was precisely the point of declaring the ceasefire first. Force Russia to show its hand, make the pattern undeniable, give Trump, and every Western leader, a clear, documented, time-stamped piece of evidence that Ukraine wants peace and Russia keeps shooting. In Yerevan, European leaders were not ambiguous. The European political community, representing dozens of European nations, rallied around Zelensky. His framing of the summer as the decisive moment, when Putin decides what to do next, expand the war or move to diplomacy, was received as exactly the kind of strategic clarity European leaders needed. Europe's position is hardening, not softening. Estonia warned that Russia could restore its full military combat readiness by 2027, a direct call for faster NATO defense preparations and stronger deterrence. The implication is clear. Even if a ceasefire happens now, Europe needs to be ready for what comes next. And Russia? Russia's defense ministry declared it would strike back at Ukraine if Ukraine tries to disrupt Victory Day festivities. Translation: Russia's ceasefire is conditional. Ukraine can stop attacking, but if Russia decides Ukraine has violated the terms, on its own judgment, with no verification mechanism, Russia will resume firing. That's not a ceasefire. That's a loaded gun pointed at Ukraine with a hair trigger. Zelensky understood this. He declared his own ceasefire anyway, not because he trusted Russia, but because he knew the world needed to watch what happened next. What happened next was 5 people died. Ukraine declared a ceasefire first, and Russia bombed 5 people dead before it even started. That's not a news story. That's a verdict. A verdict on who wants peace and who wants a parade. On who is willing to go first and who keeps shooting. On who is protecting civilian lives and who is targeting power grids at 2 in the morning. The world is watching, and the evidence is there for anyone who chooses to see it. Share this video. Make sure the people in your life who follow this war have the full picture, not just the headline, but the timeline, the pattern, and the truth. Hit like if this gave you context you needed. Subscribe for the next one. We're not done covering this story. See you there.